Thank you very much. And I just wanted to, before I get into the heart of my speeches, address a couple of comments, like I said, from the member from Winnipeg Centre, who I greatly respect. I just want to make it clear that the Conservatives are very open to working with the NDP and any other party that wants to go after tax loopholes, tax evaders. I know I've heard the member from Burnaby Westminster, if I've got the name rightly, talk a lot about the Panama Papers. Well, I asked just yesterday at Finance Committee, I asked CRA officials how many convictions, how many dollars have been collected from the Panama Papers, and I believe the answer is still zero. Right. And so I'm very happy to work with the NDP to close those loopholes, to go after the ultra-rich tax avoiders. And I want to thank, too, the member for putting forward this private member's bill, not only for the substance that it is, but it tells those who are struggling right now that the NDP care about the most vulnerable. And quite frankly, and from my heart, we heard from the member across the aisle that there seems to be an absence of recognition of the struggles that Canadians are going through right now. So thank you to the NDP for acknowledging that. But I want to talk. I want to talk about the affordability crisis. I know my NDP friends probably won't be as happy about these remarks, but I do, because I think it is the important context that surrounds all of where we are today. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about productivity and where we are as an economy, because ultimately it is the economy that will drive the wealth of the nation. If we have a strong economy, a productive economy, we will be wealthier as a nation. And we can certainly have arguments about how we divide that pie, and certainly the NDP have contributed greatly since their existence and had meaningful discussions about how we split that pie. But I think it has to be said and stated unequivocally that growing that pie is a good thing. And quite frankly, we haven't seen that pie growing. Over the last decade, we've seen almost zero GDP per capita growth. And what that means is that we are facing a lost decade here in Canada. Our GDP per capita has grown by, the actual number is 4.73%. Contrast to the United States, which is nearly 50%. Their economy is growing 10 times as fast as ours over the last 10 years. Strong productivity will lead to higher wages. And like I said, we can certainly have discussions with the NDP about making sure that we have framework in place, such as competition that I know the NDP have been outspoken on and that we agree upon, and other framework to make sure that pie is divided equally. But we also have to talk about increasing that pie, because if that pie shrinks, the reality is, and this is not me saying, this is expert, this is economists, it will be the most vulnerable who suffer the most. And just going on that, just talking a little bit about the recently Carolyn Rogers, who's deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, talked about in her now famous speech, the break glass on productivity speech, about the impact and corrosive impact of a lack of productivity. One, it hurts inflation, because an economy that can produce more goods and services simply by virtue of that reduces the cost of everything. You can think of this as the basic rules of supply and demand. If in fact an economy produces more goods, the cost of those goods go down, the effect of inflation is decreased. She went on to say that the level of productivity in Canada's business sector is more or less unchanged from 7 years ago, as I talked about. Further, back in 1984, the Canadian economy was producing 88% of the value generated by the U.S. economy per hour. That's not great. But by 2022, Canadian productivity had fallen to just 71% of the United States. Over that same period of time, Canada has also fallen behind our G7 peers, with only Italy seeing a larger decline in productivity relative to the United States. Canada's productivity has fallen for the past 13 quarters. That's incredible. For the past 13 quarters are productivity. And productivity is a fancy jargon economist word, but really all it means is our ability to make goods and deliver services. Are we making goods more efficiently, more effective? And certainly, imagine those last 13 years. We've seen tremendous innovation, the rise of digitalization, even now the beginnings of artificial intelligence, and yet our productivity in Canada has not increased over the last 13 years. A study published by the Fraser Institute found that from 2014, business investment per worker declined by 20%. And that's it. So that's a bit of the story too, is the fact that we are not attracting, maintaining investment here in Canada. And part of that, and I know what my NDP friends, because I had the pleasure of, I guess I can say his name now, he's not here, Daniel Blakey, and Mr. Blakey would go on and talk about the fact that the lack of competition was driving the lack of corporate spending. And I don't disagree entirely with that thesis. In fact, I think that's an area where the NDP and the Conservatives can actually work together. But what we can't do is we can't bring uncertainty into the markets. We can't overly restrict or unduly regulate businesses as well, because if we shrink their resources, we'll shrink the ability that they have to invest in our workers. Because Canadian workers are the best in the world, and they work as hard, if not harder, than anyone else in the world. The reason why their productivity is not increasing is because businesses are not investing in their equipment and their machinery. We are almost literally, you can imagine productivity in Canada being, we've got workers with shovels, the Americans have workers with backhoes. And so as hard as our workers work, they'll never be able to compete until we make the proper investments going forward. Over the past 5 years, productivity in the business sector has fallen 0.3%, while it has grown by 1.7% here in the U.S. So that's our problem. Longer term, the OECD projects Canada to rank dead last amongst the OECD members in real GDP growth out to 2060. Canada's 10-year average in GDP per capita is at its lowest level since the Great Depression. Cumulative growth has been about 2% in Canada versus 12% in the United States. A lack of productivity has real-life consequences. Unfortunately, we hear over and all it's the same solutions put, and I'm not talking about the private members bill, but across the aisle we hear the same solutions over and over again. It's more taxing, it's more spending, it's more taxing, it's more spending. Every time I hear this rhetoric, I am always have in my head the great line from Winston Churchill that says, "I contend for a nation to try and tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket trying to lift himself up by the handle." These Liberals seem hell-bent on taxing prosperity, taxing productivity, taxing investment, and making anyone who wants to dream of succeeding in this country feel like they want something bad. But we need prosperity, and we need achievers, and we need success. Certainly, as I started out my speech, we need to make sure that all Canadians pay their fair share, and Conservatives have been clear and unequivocal on that point. But we also need to recognize those exceptional individuals who start from nothing, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, make a success of it, create jobs, create wealth, and create prosperity, not just for themselves, but for our communities. So, in conclusion, Madam Speaker, once again, I'd like to thank this member for recognizing the terrible challenges that many Canadians are facing across this great country. What we really need in Canada is to bring back prosperity to this land through greater investments by our businesses, through an entrepreneurial spirit, through renewal, through rewarding success, and looking forward with optimism and to future prosperity. Thank you very much.